Welcome to Cache Valley Unitarian Universalist, also known as CVUU. CVUU is a group of diverse thinkers and seekers. We strive to keep open minds in our search for truth and meaning in the spirit of justice, equity, and compassion. We value the inherent worth and dignity of each individual. It matters not what you believe, everyone with a loving heart is welcome. Looks like we're all familiar faces, so I probably don't need to introduce myself. Because CVUU is a small lay-led congregation, we rely on our community as opposed to professional ministry to provide our worship content and programs. This means each week at CVUU comes with a different flavor. If one service structure, topic, or perspective doesn't quite fit your fancy, I'd encourage you to come again or offer a service yourself. So before we dive in, does anybody have any announcements?
I have an announcement.
So I actually have a couple of announcements as well. I'll be sending information out about 3 upcoming opportunities. So in addition to our Sunday worship over the past year, CVUU has been working to create more chances for our community to come together and reflect and to grow through a more robust adult religious exploration program. And of course, remember that as Unitarian Universalists, we have a pretty broad interpretation of what religious means. So beginning in March, I'll be offering another Tapestry of Faith program called Harvesting the Power. The aim of the course is not only to identify and strengthen one's leadership skills, but to understand how leadership can serve not only as an offering to others, but as a means for one's own spiritual growth. And then I'm also really excited to facilitate a new program called the Shared Pulpit. So it's a 7-session course, I guess, that dives into questions like what is worship or what makes worship meaningful. And what I'm excited about it is beyond looking at worship conceptually, the Shared Pulpit walks participants through and then helps them write a sermon or homily of their own. So it helps a participant take one's own stories and experience and find their spiritual significance and impact. And then the third opportunity to get involved is we'll be reinitiating CVUU's reading and discussion group that's been on a little bit of a break because of the holidays. All right, I think we've come to our chalice lighting. So I have a trusty assistant here. We're color coordinated and everything. So Josh is gonna light our chalice, and I invite you to say our chalice lighting words together, which Jordan should have pasted in the chat. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, the light of wisdom, and the energy of action. You wanna hold it up for folks? So our opening words today come from Nelson Mandela. There is still too much discord, hatred, division, conflict, and violence in our world here at the beginning of the 21st century. A fundamental concern for others in our individual and community lives would go a long way in making the world the better place we so passionately dreamt of. It is so easy to break down and destroy. The heroes are those who make peace and build. So Lindy has a hymn for us, and she had a bit of divine inspiration last night. So we're not going to be singing Bob Dylan's, what is it? You Can Hear It in the Wind. I can't even remember the title.
Oh, no.
Blowing in the Wind, thank you. Yeah. But I'll let Lindy introduce our first song.
Okay. This is called Ella's Song, and concerning the topic of leadership, you know, there's not a lot of songs directly about leadership, but there are lots of songs about people's experience of being a good leader, like advice they might give. The song is called Ella's Song because it's about Ella Baker. It's some of her direct quotations that have been pulled from her work. Of course, she was a civil rights leader. She's not quite as famous as a lot of people because her personal belief was that the older folks should be behind the scenes propping up the younger folks as they do the work making change in the world. And so this is a song arranged by the Bernice Johnson Reagan of Sweet Honey in the Rock. Sweet Honey in the Rock is like amazing civil rights empowerment music. If you haven't listened to it, Highly recommend. So this arranges Ella's words in a song, and I just thought it was so perfect that I can't believe I didn't think of it in time to get it in the order of service. But that's okay, we'll just sing it together. Your part stays the same the whole time, so if you want to sing, all you have to know is, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Pretty simple. You'll sing the same thing the whole time and I'll add to it. You just keep going. When I change the words, you keep going with that and it'll sound perfect. It goes like this. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. There it is. Try it. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Until the killing of black men, black mother sons is as important as the killing of white men. White mother sons, that which touches the most, that I had the chance to work with people, passing on to brothers that which has been passed on to me, because we who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. To me, young people come first. They have the courage where we fail. If I could but shed some light on as they carry us through the gale. The older I get, the better I know that the secret of my going on is when the reins are in the hands of the young who dare to run against the soul, because we who believe in freedom can't rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Not needing to clutch for power, not needing a light just to shine on me. I need to be just one in number as we stand against tyranny. Serving myself don't mean a whole lot. I come to realize they're teaching to others to stand up and fight it. The only way my struggle survives, 'cause we who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. I'm a woman, I speak it of openness, and I must be bold. At times I can be quite difficult. I'm about to no man's word, 'cause we who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Last time. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
Thank you so much, Lindy. I think Lindy was feeling a little shy about the like sudden change last night. And I told Lindy that I always have like 100% trust in her divine inspiration, that it always surprises me and always for the good. And this is a case in point about just how much we should lean into Lindy's insight. So thank you.
So nice. I'm patient. Thank you for your patience. And I'm just like, no, scratch that. Let's do this instead.
I'm deadline driven, so I get it. All right. We each come to worship with our own experiences shaping how we feel. In this supportive community, let us reflect together on the uniqueness of each person, the unison meditation on joys and concerns, and that Jordan pasted in the chat. We gather in this community, sometimes in fear, sometimes in trust, sometimes in joy, but always in the hope that we can support and strengthen one another in our common quest for healing and wholeness. So I invite you to share the joys or concerns of the week, or my trusty right-hand man is going to light 2 final candles, as is our tradition. One for those of you who kept your joys and sorrows in your heart, and one for all of those who are still in harm's way in the world. We're having some pyrotechnical issues with the matches. There's a lighter up there if you want to grab it. Maybe they're just in spirit candles today. So now we have a responsive reading. It's number 585 in the hymnal. And I'll read the regular words, and you all can read the words in the italics, but I'm realizing that in my little script, I think I cut off some of the words. So I'm going to go grab my hymnal really quick so I can actually read it appropriately. So we'll have a sacred moment of silence. All right. Thanks for being so giving. We must sit down together and reason together.
Perhaps we should sit in the dark. In the dark, we could utter our feelings.
In the dark, we could propose and describe and suggest.
In the dark, we could not see who speaks, and only the words who say what they say.
No one would speak more than twice. No one would speak less than once.
Thus saying what we feel and what we want, what we fear for ourselves and each other into the dark.
Perhaps we could begin to listen. So today's service is called a contortionist lesson on leadership. And you can read into that however you'd like. But how about we begin? Some of my favorite memories of my childhood came from my family's regular trips to Pearl Street, the pedestrian mall in Boulder, Colorado. We'd drive 30 minutes from where we lived in the suburbs north of Denver on Route 36 and head toward 11th Street, the west end of the 5 brick-paved blocks of the mall. It's a little remarkable to me now that back then, in the early 2000s, there was still free on-street parking. Although as an adult, 5 blocks doesn't sound like much, as a kid, I remember it feeling like its own magical world. Within the first block, there was Lighthouse Books that featured a staircase that descended from the street, this spooky underground entrance. In the third block, there were fountains and gazebos. Then, beginning at 14th Street, the real attractions came. It was here where there were marble and brass statues, beaver, toad, rabbit, and snail. Not just art, kids were allowed to climb on them. In the final block of the mall was the kite and toy store Into the Wind. Passing through the storefront was like entering into a kaleidoscope of color. In addition to the dragons and butterflies that lined the ceiling, the store had every possible way to engage a kid. Board games, magic tricks, a glow-in-the-dark room, puzzles, towers of marbles, and the biggest collection of wind-up toys one has ever seen. Now, even with all this delight, what I looked for most was a street performer who I called the Bendy Man. Years later, I've learned his name is Ibashi. Of the rotating street performers Pearl Street featured, novice musicians, balloon animal artists, magicians, fire blowers, I was most enchanted by Ibashi, the self-described Rastafarian yogi. Unlike other performers who attracted crowds with loud music or elaborate prompts, Ibashi's act was short, simple, and quiet. His body, a set of juggling balls, and a small 20 by 20 inch see-through plexiglass box. He began his act by sitting on the ground, legs outstretched on either side, with his chest and chin on the ground, arms folded underneath his body, so his hands rested crossed on his lower back. A fellow street performer, the Zip Code Man, once commented that Ibashi grabbed people's attention through an overwhelming stillness. Ibashi's act progressed through a series of more and more elaborate and impressive postures, a full split, sitting cross-legged with the other foot behind his head while juggling, standing so far bent over a wide foot stance that his arms and face would poke through the backside of his body. For the finale, the Bendy Man would fold his 6-foot-tall frame into that 20 by 20 inch box. While as a kid, I was astounded and inspired by his physical flexibility, something else the Zip Code Man said about Ibashi has changed my perspective about what his act might inspire us towards as adults. The Zip Code Man said, a subtle but powerful quality of his show was how he charmed his audience, not just with words, jokes about his postures, but with quiet gestures, like waving at people with his foot, or when he signaled for people to applaud by clapping his own hands, which were against his upper back. Ibashi not only drew a crowd because of an authentic charm, but it seems because of flexibility of mind. He crafted an act in contrast to what one might expect of a street performer, one that was quiet and focused more on the audience than on himself. There's a modern day term for this, psychological flexibility, that I'd like to propose as the quality we most need to look for and cultivate in leaders, others, and ourselves. What I find compelling and important about psychological flexibility is that it spans a wide range of dynamic processes that unfold over time. Someone who is psychologically flexible can recognize and adapt to fluctuating situations. They are able to shift mindsets or their behavioral responses when certain strategies compromise personal or social functioning. They are able to balance competing needs and desires. And finally, they are able to stay aware, open, and committed to behaviors that are congruent with deeply held values. Rather than focusing on specific content within a person, when psychological flexibility is based on their repeated interactions with different people and environments. Who, you might be wondering, is a leader who exhibits this quality? I'm very much aware that we are just 4 days past a significant change in this country's leadership, and I know that for many this change has brought a sigh of relief and hope. But just as in 2016, when half the country was celebrating and half the country felt as though their values and way of life were threatened, the same is true now. I can't help but feel we've put ourselves in a box with the degree of promise placed on the change of party leadership. Policy might change, but the division between us is far from healed. The leadership that leads to relational healing needs to come from us. And yet, across the political and ideological divide, hardly anybody feels heard. A disclaimer, I'm about to call out progressive liberals, and while there's probably a good number of people listening who put themselves in the progressive liberal camp, as I said before, as a diverse faith community, I don't presume, nor would I want everyone tuned in to identify as such. More often than not, when in conversation about matters of social and environmental justice with people who identify as white progressive liberals, they say they want to bridge divides and create change. They say that they wish they knew to have a conversation with those whom they have identified as different than themselves. And time again, these statements are followed with a but. But I just don't understand how it is that they could think or feel that way. If but seems like a small, unimportant word, I'd like to invite us to sit with its implications for a moment. A little wisdom from the Schoolhouse Rock videos of my childhood. Who knew the animated grammar lesson, conjunction, junction, what's your function, would prove so formative? A conjunction is used to introduce a phrase or clause contrasting with what has already been mentioned. Not this, but that. I want to bridge the divide, but I don't know how someone could think that way. It seems like the conversation ended before it could get started. So, how do we be the person who is psychologically flexible? Someone able to recognize and adapt to the fluctuating situation and demands. Someone able to shift our mindset and responses when our current strategy, which clearly has not been working, compromises our personal or social functioning. Someone able to balance the competing desires of what we think and is socially just with the needs of the other. Someone able to stay aware, open, and committed to behaviors that are congruent with our deeply held values. A leader I've been encouraged and educated by is George Gould, founder of People's Action, a network of local community groups from across the country that helped build one of the largest race-conscious organizing programs in rural America. People's Action uses a variety of community organizing techniques to bring together folks across the political structure where their experiences and values meet. In the introduction to the podcast hosted by Gould, To See Each Other, he asks that listeners call on their psychological flexibility and stay open-minded and willing to complicate the present narrative of rural America. Gould acknowledges that in the wake of the 2016 election, many accepted the explanation propelled by the media that people at Trump rallies wearing Make America Great Again hats were just rural white racists. The premise of the work of People's Action, as illustrated in To See Each Other, however, comes from 4 truths. Truth number 1, painting all of rural America as white racists and backward is both inaccurate and unhelpful. Truth number 2, rural America is far more diverse than we acknowledge. Much of the rural South is majority Black. That Latinx folks are the fastest growing segment of the rural population, and half of the nation's Native Americans live in rural communities. Truth number 3, there is beautiful and courageous work happening in rural communities to bridge across race and politics. There is a move towards justice in so many rural communities and small towns. Truth number 4, the partisan impulse to give up on damn near half the country is not the answer. What we seem to forget is that those we other and wonder how is it that they could think that way are struggling too. To put it simply, how can we expect people to be with us if we are not with them? In looking at the evidence that traditional political strategies and canvassing has little to no effect in changing people's attitudes and how they vote, People's actions adapted to the outcry of the rural working class and abandoned the typical methods used to attempt attitudinal change. Instead of trying to change minds and hearts through judgment or giving facts, people's action realized that it is not about getting conflicted voters to listen to someone trying to shift their position, but rather a person's attitude changed only once they were listened to. A strategy used by people's action to better listening is something called deep canvassing. People's action explains that deep canvassing is not your traditional door-knocking campaign. It's in fact not a campaign at all. They are longer conversations that require a radical empathy, an ability to start where people are without judgment. We ask people why they feel the way they do, and we share how we think about this subject and how that thinking came to be. We don't try to persuade people. These sorts of intimate conversations also require a faith in people's ability to re-examine things if given the right context. It requires letting go of the politics of divide and conquer and the idea that isolating ourselves keeps us safer. Instead of providing a hypothetical of what this looks like, I'm going to now play a segment from the second episode of To See Each Other. Caitlin, who's the voice that you'll hear, is speaking about her experience engaging in deep canvassing in her home community in the Thumb of Michigan. So let me just take a minute to share my screen. Too many Zoom windows. You get to see my service script for a moment.
Deep canvassing, I mean, I think you would assume that people would feel put off by the stranger asking what it was like for them to be a single mom 20 years ago.
We're not hearing the audio anymore, Emerson. It stopped for some reason.
Sorry, I thought that I fixed that so that I could mute myself and folks could still listen. So let me backtrack and Josh and I will make sure to be oh so quiet.
Was like for them to be a single mom 20 years ago, or what it was like for them to have to make decisions to go to work instead of taking care of their kids when they were sick, or instead of taking their kids to the doctors, still sending them to school. Or you'd think that they would feel that a stranger should not be asking them those questions. But if you have the courage to ask, people, for the most part, are willing to tell you. And for a lot of people, it's a transformative experience because nobody's ever asked them questions like that, not even their closest loved ones or best friends. The very first conversation we had as part of this project, we kind of had a script with this first door that we went to, but it was really a mess. We just knew we needed to ask questions to get to his story and what he was connecting with immigrants. So his name was Ed, and I had two volunteers with me, Susan and Zareth. And they were just going to observe. And I was scared shitless because I had no idea what I was doing. So we asked Ed, how do you feel about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is definitely and 0 is definitely not, and 5 is undecided? I'm a 10, Ed says. Okay, well, what about if it included undocumented immigrants? He went off about how undocumented immigrants didn't deserve it and how that makes him want to put himself at a 0. I asked him if he knew any immigrants, and he didn't. Then I asked him when's a time in his life when he's really needed care or support. And he started telling me about how he wasn't too happy with where his life was. Like, he's glad that he is where he is now in this trailer park in Oakland County, but he thought he was going to go a lot further. And he didn't, because instead he had struggled with addiction to the extent that he was incarcerated, that he was homeless for several years. And I just kept asking questions about that experience, about what happened and what it felt like, and what his relationship was to his family at that time. He shared about how his dad had been disappointed in him. And then he realized he did know an immigrant. His dad was an immigrant. His dad was an immigrant from England, and he worked in factories in England as a child and immigrated to the United States for a better life. And I kind of made the case to him that the immigrants coming over here and him have a lot more in common. This economy's hard and this world is hard, and they're just wanting to do what's best for their families. And he agreed. So by the end of the conversation, he had changed his mind completely. That was the first conversation. It was incredible. I cried a little bit, like I was tearing up. And Susan and Zareth and I looked at each other afterwards, like wide eyes, and like our heads kind of like shaking or nodding, like just incredulous, disbelief. It was just amazing. I think I've learned that when you're talking to a voter, you're strangers. You're starting out with a blank slate. And in that conversation, we're showing them so much care and empathy about their own hard times and asking so many questions about their own life. We really honor their story and their wisdom and their dignity. And I realized that I'm not starting out on a blank slate with a lot of my loved ones and a lot of my friends and family members. I have not 100% honored their dignity and their experiences and their wisdom. And that has damaged their trust in me, you know? So I realized I needed to rebuild my relationships with a lot of my loved ones. So like one of
It's unfortunate that she didn't know that we were going to pause it right there, and she didn't take a breath, so it makes cutting the audio off awkward. So I see a great deal of psychological flexibility in leadership in Caitlin. The very choice to ask open, non-judgmental questions shows her ability to shift to a different strategy to be more effective personally and as a community. And as Caitlin describes, she's providing a context not even given by folks' family or friends for people to articulate their experiences and be witnessed in their struggle. She is living the compassion and openness many voice as a value, and at times fall short of in saying and feeling, but. My own thinking has been so rigid, it had never occurred to me that if we set our assumptions aside, the voter, the stranger, is someone we have a blank slate with to honor from the onset their story, wisdom, and dignity. We just have to be brave enough to ask. For years, watching Ibashi's act, I wanted to know how he'd figured out the exact way he needed to fold his body to do what seemed unnatural and impossible, fit himself in that 20 by 20 inch box. Despite opportunity after opportunity, I let shyness and the worry that he wouldn't care about a question from a kid have me go home with my curiosity unaddressed. When I was finally able to overcome my fear of him as a stranger, of being dismissed, his answer was simple, kind, and a little bit profound. Well, Ibashi said and winked, getting in is easy. I can use all the room around the box. I'm a lot more stuck once I'm in there. The trick is to find a little bit of space and reach out one hand. So with that, we're gonna transition to our offering. There are two ways that you can offer today. The first is by following the PayPal link that Jordan is going to paste in the chat, and you can give as you might if we're still passing a donation basket. Half of what is collected each week is passed on to local organizations. And I guess I'm realizing now that I'm out of the loop on who we are giving to. Does anyone know where half of the collection is going to? Okay, silence. Maybe we should figure that out. The other way that you can support CVUU, however, is signing up to be a chalice lighter. So the chalice lighter program is a bit like a GoFundMe, except for it's like really isolated to CVUU congregations. So how it works is 3 times a year, a call is sent out to chalice lighters in our region to support projects a congregation cannot afford on their own. So to be clear, by signing up, you're not making a commitment to give. You're just saying that you're willing to receive a call when these projects come up and then decide at that time if it's a project that you want to support. So the reason why I'm encouraging folks to sign up to be chalice lighters is that CVUU is applying for a chalice lighter grant to help offset the cost of the retaining wall project that we had to complete this winter. And how the grant works is the more of us who are signed up as chalice lighters, the greater our chances of receiving the grant. So they do this like not based off of pure numbers, but percentage of chalice lighters per the size of a congregation. So, you know, we won't be faulted for being a small community. And while a big wall might not seem all that exciting to give to, it is holding us up, not just the property, but our values of being a good neighbor and steward to the community, and our commitment to have a space of gathering for ourselves and others. So you can sign up to be a chalice lighter by following the link in the chat. And then I'll just share my screen for a second so that I can show you where the link is on the page, because it's a little bit buried. So if you follow the link, you'll get to a page like this. And then if you scroll down on the page, the link to become a chalice lighter, where did it go? Oh, it's right here after the bold, become a chalice lighter. And then when you click on that link, you'll be directed to this form. So it's as simple as filling out the form. And then the district that we're a part of is the Mountain Desert District. So Lindy's going to play a little bit of instrumental music so that folks have time to do that now if you feel called, because I know that if you say we'll do it later, it happens less. So Lindy, I'll turn it over to you, and then in a few minutes we will transition into our closing hymn and closing words.
Okay, how long? Do you want to actually just cue me? Like you can cough and I'll push enter so that the lyrics pop up in the chat. I don't know how long to go. That'll be fine.
Yeah, I think maybe just like 2 or 3 minutes so folks have time to do that and we're just not sitting in silence. So
cool. All right, let's do it.
an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which is sacred to so many of us, a community of memory and of hope, for we are now the keepers of the dream. So Lindy, whenever you want to lead us in our closing hymn, we would be most delighted.
All right. This hymn is 1028 in the Teal Book, Fire of Commitment. I posted the lyrics in the chat. The chorus, is listed where it comes in. You'll have to scroll back up to when the fire of commitment sets our minds and soul ablaze. Anyway, I thought this is what I think of when I think of UU leadership themes.
Thank you so much, Lindy. It really adds so much. So to close, I'd like to read you the January 20th entry of Mark Nepo's Daily Spiritual Reader, The Book of Awakening. The entry is titled To See with Love and starts with an epigraph. Enlightenment is intimacy with all things. Jack Cornfield. Each of us spins repeatedly from blindness to radiance, from dividedness to wholeness, and it is our impulse to stay in touch with all that is alive that keeps us from staying lost. It is the impulse to be intimate. It brings to mind the young blind French boy, Jacques Lesserman, who, in learning how to navigate his way among the other forms of life in his darkness, stumbled onto the secret of undividing living. He said, "It is more than seeing them. It is tuning in on them and allowing the current they hold to connect with one's own, like electricity. To put it differently, this means an end of living in front of things and a beginning of living with them. Never mind if the word sounds shocking, for this is love. To live with things and not in front of them, to no longer watch, but to realize that we are a part of everything we see. This is the love that keeps moving us back into wholeness when divided. To love by admitting our connection to everything and everyone is how we stay well. Allowing the current of another's inwardness to connect with our own is the beginning of both intimacy and enlightenment. May it be so. So we'll go ahead and extinguish our chalice. And if you want to join me by saying the chalice extinguishing words, which Jordan posted in the chat. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of love, or the fire of courage and commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world. Thank you everyone for being here.